My father gave my brother a Tesla, a $13 million mansion, and a $75 million company on the same day that I sat in the back row of my own family's living room, and nobody said my name. Not once. 2 hours of speeches and toasts and champagne glasses clinking and my father's voice filling every corner of the house I grew up in, and my name was not spoken a single time. My brother's name was spoken 43 times. I know because I counted. When you're invisible, you count things. It gives you something to do while the world celebrates someone else. It was May 17th, 2025, Sterling Crane's Harvard Business School graduation party. 80 guests in the Scarsdale mansion. Family, friends, business associates, the particular species of Westchester County wealth that shows up in linen and leaves in Lexus. The caterers wore black. The flowers were white. The champagne was French. Everything was curated for the celebration of a man who had done everything right in a family that measured. Right by degrees and titles and the particular shine that comes from never having struggled. I was in the last row of chairs that had been set up in the great room. Not by assignment, by instinct. The back row was where I had always been in this family, behind the curtain, behind the conversation, behind the son who mattered. My father stood at the front. Garrett Crane, 62 years old, CEO of Crane Industrial Coatings, the kind of man whose handshake feels like a performance review. He was wearing a suit that cost more than some people's cars, and a smile that he reserved exclusively for occasions involving Sterling. "I've always known that Sterling was destined for greatness," he said, and the room murmured in agreement because rooms full of wealthy people always agree with the man writing the checks. Today, I'm proud to announce that Sterling will take over as CEO of Crane Industrial Coatings within the next 2 years. He will inherit the company, this house, and the legacy that 3 generations of Cranes have built. Applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from people who genuinely believe they are witnessing the crowning of a prince. And to celebrate, Garrett paused, timing it the way he timed everything, with the practiced rhythm of a man who controlled rooms for a living. "We've gotten Sterling a small token of our pride." He gestured toward the window. In the circular driveway, gleaming under the May sun, was a brand-new Tesla Model S. Midnight blue, bow on the hood. The crowd gasped, the way crowds gasp at things that cost $90,000, which is with delight and a trace of envy. Sterling stood up. 6'2", Harvard blazer, jaw like a magazine advertisement. The effortless confidence of a man who has never been told he isn't enough. He hugged our father. He hugged our mother. He shook hands with the board members and the business associates and the family friends who had watched him grow from a golden child into a golden man. Nobody looked at me. Nobody turned to the back row and said, "And Hollis is here too." Nobody mentioned the other son, the older son, the firstborn who was sitting in a suit he'd bought himself, watching his family give away everything to the brother who was born 3 years after him and had somehow arrived first at every milestone that mattered. I didn't react. I didn't stand up. I didn't leave. I sat in my chair and I watched, the way I have watched my entire life, from the back of every room my family has ever put me in. And then Maren walked in. But before I tell you about Maren, and before I tell you what she said, and before I tell you what happened to the room when the truth came out, I need to tell you about the anchor. 'Cause that's what my father called me, the anchor. And you need to understand what that word did to a kid before you can understand what that kid did with it. My name is Hollis Crane. I was born in 1991 in Scarsdale, New York, the first son of Garrett and Lenora Crane, and for the first 3 years of my life, I was the only son, which meant I was, by default, the heir, the future, the next generation of Cranes who would run the company and live in the house and carry the name forward with the proper amount of shine. Then Sterling arrived in 1994. And then, 5 years later, when I was 9, the diagnosis arrived too. Dyslexia. A word that the specialist explained meant my brain processed written language differently, not deficiently, differently. The letters moved on the page, reversed, shuffled, rearranged themselves into nonsense while my brain tried to decode them like a man trying to read a newspaper in a mirror. My teachers flagged it. The specialist explained it. My mother nodded and said, "We'll get him help." My father heard the diagnosis and said, "So he's slow." Not a question, a verdict. "He's not slow, Garrett. He has a processing difference. It affects how he reads and writes. It has nothing to do with intelligence. If he can't read at grade level, what do you call that? Dyslexia? I call it a problem. The help came: tutors, reading specialists, accommodations at school. But the verdict was already in. In Garrett Crane's mind, his firstborn son was deficient, and Sterling, who read early, spoke early, tested early, achieved early, provided the contrast that cemented the verdict into family law. Sterling got Exeter. I got held back in 8th grade. Sterling got straight A's. I got a 2.1 GPA. Sterling got the front page of the holiday newsletter. I got mentioned in the last paragraph, if at all. Hollis is doing well. Hollis is doing well, the family equivalent of bless his heart. By high school, the division was structural. Sterling was the investment. I was the cost. Sterling was the future. I was the problem. And my father, Garrett Crane, CEO, patriarch, the man whose approval was the sun around which the entire family orbited, summarized his assessment of his two sons with a metaphor that I carry with me to this day, not as a wound, but as a fuel. Sterling is the sail, he said at a dinner party when I was 16. I was in the kitchen getting water. He didn't know I could hear. Hollis is the anchor. Every family has one. The anchor is the thing that keeps you from going anywhere. The anchor. Not said with cruelty, said with resignation. The casual, almost bored dismissal of a father who had weighed his son and found him wanting, and had moved on to the son who measured up. I heard it through the kitchen door. I set down the glass of water. I walked upstairs. I lay on my bed. And something inside me changed. Not broke, changed. The way metal changes when you heat it. It doesn't crack, it doesn't shatter. It becomes something different, something harder. I didn't cry, I didn't confront him, I made a decision. The decision was this. I would never ask my father for anything, not his approval, not his money, not his name on a check or a letter of recommendation, or a doorway into the world he controlled. I would build my own world. And I would build it so far from his line of sight that he would never see it coming. I barely graduated high school in 2010. Sterling was 16 and already being recruited by Ivy League colleges. My mother didn't come to my graduation. She was at Sterling's award ceremony at Exeter. My father came. He sat in the back. He did not clap when my name was called. Afterward, in the parking lot, he said, "So, what's your plan?" "I'm going to work." "Work where?" "I'll figure it out." "You should figure it out fast, Hollis. The world doesn't wait for people who can't keep up." I left home that summer. I was 19. I moved to Newark, New Jersey, because a high school friend's cousin had a room in an apartment near Penn Station that cost $500 a month, and I had $1,200 in savings from a part-time job at a hardware store. I didn't tell my parents where I was going. They didn't ask. For the first 2 years, I did whatever work I could find. Construction labor, restaurant dishwashing, a brief stint at a car wash. Then, in 2012, when I was 21, I walked into a shipping warehouse in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and applied for a job loading trucks. The warehouse was operated by a regional freight company. The work was physical, lifting packages, loading trailers, sorting freight by destination. It paid $13 an hour, and it started at 4 a.m., and it was exactly the kind of job that Garrett Crane would have pointed to as proof that his son was, indeed, the anchor. But something happened on that loading dock. Something that had never happened to me in a classroom, at a dinner table, or in any room my family had ever put me in. I understood it. Not reading, not writing. Not the symbols on a page that my brain scrambled into chaos. The freight system. The flow of goods. The logic of where things are and where they need to be and how to get them there efficiently. It was spatial. It was physical. It was three-dimensional problem-solving that didn't require decoding letters. It required understanding movement, capacity, timing, and routes. Dyslexia had made me terrible at reading, but it had given me something else. A brain that thought in systems, in patterns, in spatial relationships. A brain that could look at a loading dock with 40 trailers and see the optimal sequence for loading them the way a chess player sees moves on a board. Not letter by letter, move by move. Within 6 months, I was the fastest loader on the dock. Within a year, the supervisor put me on route optimization, figuring out the most efficient paths for the trucks to take between pickups and drop-offs. Within 3 years, I was managing routes for the entire Northeast Division. In 2014, I met a man named Cyrus Walden. He was 57 at the time, a retired trucking company owner who had sold his fleet and was consulting for the warehouse as a favor to the general manager. Cyrus was the kind of man who had started with nothing, one truck, bought in 1976, and built a regional freight operation over 40 years. He saw something in me that nobody in my family had ever seen. "You think in trucks," he said one afternoon, watching me rework a route map that I'd spread across the break room table. "Most people think in paper. You think in trucks. I can't read paper very well." "I know," I noticed, "and I'm telling you it doesn't matter. The world moves on trucks, not paper. You understand how things move. That's worth more than 100 Harvard degrees." Cyrus became my mentor. Not formally. He never used that word, and neither did I. He just started showing up at the warehouse, asking me questions, listening to my answers, and teaching me the business side of freight. Pricing, contracts, insurance, compliance. The things that I would need to know if I ever wanted to own trucks instead of load them. In 2017, when I was 26, I told Cyrus I wanted to buy my own truck. He looked at me for a long time. Then he wrote me a check for $40,000. "Pay me back when you can, no interest, no contract. Just a handshake and a promise that you won't name the truck after me." I bought a used Freightliner Cascadia, named the company Ironclad Logistics and Supply, filed the LLC papers in New Jersey, and on a Monday morning in March of 2017, I drove my first load, 16 pallets of industrial cleaning products from Elizabeth to Baltimore, and earned $2,200 for a single trip. $2,200, more than a week's pay at the warehouse, for one trip that I planned, drove, and delivered myself. That was the beginning. By 2018, I had 3 trucks. I hired Maren Buckley, a former dispatcher at UPS who was smarter than everyone she worked for and angrier about it than she should have been, which made her perfect. She handled operations. I handled growth. We argued about everything and agreed on the one thing that mattered: we were going to build something that nobody could take from us. By 2020, we had 22 trucks. By 2022, 60. By 2024, 140 trucks, 3 warehouses, Elizabeth, Trenton, and Allentown, and over 200 commercial clients across 14 states. Annual revenue, $38 million. Company valuation, approximately $62 million. I was 33 years old. I had a company worth more than most people's fantasies, and my father still thought I was loading trucks in a warehouse somewhere. In 2021, Ironclad's sales team landed a new account, Crane Industrial Coatings. My family's company, $75 million in revenue, needed reliable freight for their specialty coatings, hazardous materials classification, temperature-sensitive shipping, tight delivery windows, the kind of logistics challenge that most freight companies hate and Ironclad thrives on. The account was managed by my sales director, a man named Asa Trumbull, who had no idea that the CEO of the client company was my father. Garrett dealt with Asa's team, approved the contract, and started paying Ironclad approximately $2.1 million per year in shipping fees. I found out about the account 3 weeks after it was signed. I was reviewing new contracts and saw the name Crane Industrial Coatings, Westchester County, New York. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the file and said nothing. I didn't cancel the account. I didn't reveal myself. I didn't call my father and say, "Hey, Dad, the company that ships your products is the one your dumb son built." I just let it run. Because the irony wasn't a weapon, it was a fact. And I had learned long ago that the most powerful thing you can do with a fact is let it exist without needing anyone to see it. But Maren saw it. Of course she did. She saw everything. "Your family's company is paying us $2 million a year to ship their products." "Yes." "And they don't know you own Ironclad?" "No." "And your father praised our efficiency at his board meeting last quarter?" "Apparently." "Hollis, this is insane. You need to tell them." "Why?" "Because your father thinks you're a failure, and you're literally keeping his supply chain running." "I don't need him to know that." "Maybe you don't, but he does." I disagreed. For 4 years, I disagreed. Because telling my father meant caring what he thought, and I had spent 13 years building a life on the principle that his opinion was irrelevant. Until May 17th, 2025. Sterling's graduation party, the Tesla, the announcement, the anchor sitting in the back row, counting the number of times his brother's name was spoken and his own name wasn't. 43-0. Maren showed up at 7:15 p.m. I had told her about the party. I had not invited her. She came anyway because Marin Buckley does not take instructions from anyone, including the man who signs her checks, and because she had spent 7 years watching me absorb my family's contempt and had decided, unilaterally, that the absorption was over. She was wearing a blazer and heels, which was unusual. Marin's typical wardrobe was boots and a jacket with Ironclad's logo on the chest. She walked through the front door of the Scarsdale mansion, past the caterers and the champagne and the 80 guests who didn't know her, and she found me in the back row. She leaned down, and she whispered 5 words. It's time to tell them. Marin, don't. You've been sitting in the back of your own family's living room for 2 hours while your father gave away everything to your brother and didn't say your name once. Not once, Hollis. I know. And you're okay with that? I'm not here for them. I'm here because Sterling invited me. Sterling doesn't even know what you do for a living. Sterling never asked. Exactly. None of them have ever asked, and that's the problem. Not that they don't know, that they never cared enough to find out. Marin, I'm not asking your permission. She turned and walked toward the front of the room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not excitement, but the particular vertigo of a man who is about to lose control of a narrative he has spent 13 years constructing. The room was still buzzing from the Tesla reveal. Garrett was holding court near the fireplace, drink in hand, accepting congratulations like a man at his own coronation. Sterling was beside him, fielding handshakes. Lenora was circulating, making sure every guest had been personally greeted, performing the role of family hostess with the precision of a woman who had been doing it for 30 years. Marin walked up to my father. She extended her hand. Mr. Crane, I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Marin Buckley. I'm the COO of Ironclad Logistics and Supply. Garrett shook her hand. His face registered recognition, not of Marin, but of the company name. Ironclad. Yes, I know the name. You're our freight carrier. For the last 4 years. We handle all of your specialty coatings distribution across the eastern seaboard. Excellent company. Best logistics operation we've ever worked with. Are you here representing the firm? In a sense. I thought you should know who owns it. She turned. She pointed at me. At the back row, at the older son in the suit he'd bought himself. At the anchor. Ironclad Logistics and Supply was founded and is solely owned by your son, Hollis Crane. Here is what silence sounds like in a room of 80 people. It sounds like the air being sucked out through every window simultaneously. It sounds like champagne going flat in the glass. It sounds like the machinery of an entire family's narrative grinding to a halt, every gear jamming, every assumption cracking, every carefully maintained belief about who is the sail and who is the anchor collapsing under the weight of a single, unimaginable fact. Garrett Crane looked at Marin, looked at me, looked at Marin again. That's not possible. It's not only possible, Mr. Crane. It's been true for 8 years. Ironclad was founded in 2017 with a single truck. It now operates 140 trucks, 3 warehouses, and over 200 commercial clients. Annual revenue is $38 million. Company valuation is approximately $62 million. And the man who built it from nothing is sitting in the back row of this room because nobody thought to put him anywhere else. The room was looking at me now, 80 pairs of eyes. My mother's eyes wide, her hand over her mouth. Sterling's eyes confused, trying to process information that didn't fit into any framework he had. Garrett's eyes narrowed, the eyes of a man who is being told something he doesn't want to believe because believing it would require dismantling everything he has believed for 34 years. Hollis. My father's voice. Not loud, quiet. The quiet of a man whose certainty has just been punctured. Is this true? I stood up, slowly, buttoned my jacket. And I walked from the back of the room to the front, passing through the crowd of guests who had spent the last 2 hours celebrating my brother while I sat invisible in the last row. I stopped in front of my father. 3 feet between us. The distance that had been 34 years long. Yes, I said. It's true. You own Ironclad Logistics? Founded it, built it, own it. We've been paying you $2.1 million a year for the last 4 years. Your board praised our efficiency. You signed the contract renewal yourself last September. Why didn't you tell me? The question. The question I had been asked by Marin, by Nadia, by Cyrus, by everyone who knew the truth and couldn't understand why I kept it from the one person it would devastate most. "Because you never asked," I said. "Not once, in 34 years, did you ask me what I was doing with my life. You decided, when I was 9 years old, that I was stupid. You decided when I was 14 that I was the anchor. You decided when Sterling got into Exeter that you had one son worth investing in and one son worth forgetting. And you forgot me, Dad, systematically, completely. You forgot me so thoroughly that you've been paying me $2 million a year for 4 years and didn't know it was me." The room was deathly silent. 80 people bearing witness to a family reckoning that should have been private, but was happening in public because 34 years of private pain had never been addressed. The company that ships every barrel of protective coating you manufacture, the company that keeps your supply chain running, the company that your own board called the backbone of our distribution network, that company was built by the son you called the anchor. Built without your money, without your connections, without your name, without a single word of encouragement from the man who was supposed to give it. Garrett's face was doing something I had never seen it do. The control was cracking. The CEO mask, the boardroom composure, the patriarch's authority was dissolving, and underneath it was something raw and unfinished, something that looked, if I'm being honest, like shame. "Hollis, I'm not finished." I turned to my mother. Lenora, standing by the window, tears running down her face, her hand still over her mouth. "Mom, you introduced me at Aunt Claire's birthday last year as our other son, not Hollis, not your firstborn, our other son. Like I was the spare key on the ring, the one you keep but never use." She closed her eyes. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say because what I'd said was true, and truth, when it's delivered without anger, is harder to argue with than any accusation. I looked at Sterling, my younger brother, the golden child, the sail. He was standing beside our father, and his face was not what I expected. I expected defensiveness. I expected the reflexive protection of a man whose pedestal has just been knocked sideways. Instead, I saw something simpler and more devastating. Confusion. The genuine confusion of a man who had been so thoroughly centered in the family narrative that he had never, not once, considered what the narrative looked like from the outside. "Sterling. Hollis, I had no idea." "I know you didn't, and that's not entirely your fault. You were given what I wasn't, and you took it because that's what people do when things are given to them. But you never asked either. In 31 years, you've never asked me what I do for a living. Not once." He opened his mouth, closed it, because he was running through his memory, looking for the exception, and there wasn't one. "You didn't know I owned a company because you never knew anything about me. None of you did. You knew my GPA, you knew my diagnosis. You knew the narrative, that I was the slow one, the problem, the anchor, but you didn't know me, because knowing me would have required looking at me. And nobody in this family has looked at me since Sterling was born." The room was absolutely still. I could hear the caterers in the kitchen, the clink of dishes being stacked, the mundane sounds of a party that was still happening in the background while a family was unraveling in the foreground. I hadn't planned to say any of this. Marin had ambushed me with the reveal, and I had intended to confirm it and walk away. But standing in front of my father, in the living room of a $13 million mansion that I had never been offered a piece of, something opened. Not rage, something older than rage. The accumulated weight of 34 years of erasure. Every parent-teacher conference my father skipped. Every holiday newsletter that reduced me to a footnote. Every dinner-table conversation that orbited Sterling's achievements while mine went unmentioned because they didn't exist in the family's understanding of reality. I want you to understand something, Dad. I didn't build Ironclad to prove you wrong. I built it because after you called me the anchor, I decided that I would never need you again. Not your money, not your company, not your approval. I would build my own thing, with my own hands, on my own terms. And I did. You could have told me? And said what? "Hey, Dad, the kid you wrote off runs a bigger logistics operation than most companies you know." You would have taken credit for it. You would have found a way to make it about you, about Crane resilience, about Crane blood, about how even the anchor eventually comes through. And it's not about you, it was never about you. It's about the kid who couldn't read until he was 14 and figured out that the world moves on trucks, not paper, and built a fleet of 140 of them while you were busy polishing your golden child. Garrett was looking at me in a way he had never looked at me before. Not with pride, that would come later, if it came at all, and I wasn't sure I wanted it. Not with anger, the anger would come later too, when the embarrassment of being exposed in his own living room turned into defensiveness. In that moment, he was looking at me with the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the thing he discarded was the most valuable thing he had. $62 million, he said quietly, give or take. More than Crane Industrial. Crane Industrial is worth $75 million in revenue. But revenue isn't value, Dad. You taught me that yourself, at one of those dinners I wasn't supposed to hear. Ironclad's enterprise value, assets, contracts, growth trajectory, is approximately $62 million. Your company, by the same measure, is worth about $50 million. You're telling me your company is worth more than mine. I'm telling you your company pays mine to keep it running. Draw your own conclusions. I turned away. Not dramatically, not with a mic drop or a door slam. I turned the way a man turns when he said what he came to say and the room has gotten too small for what's happening inside it. I walked toward the door. Sterling caught me in the hallway. Hollis, wait. I stopped. My brother, 3 years younger, 6 inches taller, Harvard-educated, Tesla-owning, company-inheriting Sterling Crane, standing in the hallway of our parents' mansion, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I didn't know, he said, about any of it. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have heard me? If I'd called you at Harvard and said, hey Sterling, I bought a truck and started a logistics company, would you have taken that call seriously? Or would you have said, that's great, Hollis, in the same tone Mom uses when she says I'm doing well? He flinched, because he knew the answer. We both did. I would have said, that's great, he admitted. I wouldn't have understood what it meant, because understanding what it meant would have required you to question the story that you're the gifted one and I'm the broken one. And that story has been comfortable for everyone in this family except me. It wasn't comfortable, he said. It was just there. I never thought about it. That's the problem, Sterling. You never had to think about it. The story worked for you. It didn't work for me, so I built a different one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. Can I see it? The company, the trucks, the warehouses. Can I see what you built? I looked at my brother, 31 years old, MBA, the new VP of Operations at Crane Industrial Coatings, a man who had been handed everything and was now asking for the first time to see what his brother had built with nothing. Yeah, I said, come to Newark next week, I'll give you the tour. I'd like that. Bring work boots, the loading dock is dirty. He almost smiled. I'll buy some. First pair? First pair. 2 months have passed. It's July 2025. The summer is hot and the trucks are running and ironclad. Just landed a contract with a national food distributor that will add $6 million in annual revenue and require 12 new trucks and 20 new drivers. I told Marin she was out of line for ambushing me at the party. She said, I know, and I'd do it again. I gave her a raise. She deserved it. Not for the ambush, but for 7 years of making ironclad work while I was building it. Sterling came to Newark. I gave him the tour. He walked through the Elizabeth warehouse in borrowed work boots that were too clean, watching the loading operations, the dispatch system, the fleet management software, the organized chaos of 140 trucks moving freight across 14 states. He watched with the eyes of a man who studies business, MBA eyes, analytical eyes, and I watched him watching, and I saw the moment when the scale of what I'd built registered. This is remarkable, Hollis. It's a trucking company. It's a $62 million trucking company built by a guy who started on a loading dock. That's not a trucking company, that's a case study. I'll leave the case studies to you. I just move the freight. He laughed, the first real laugh between us in years, maybe ever. Can I ask you something? Yeah. The dyslexia, how did I build a company if I can't read properly? I pulled out my phone, showed him the speech-to-text apps, the audio contract reviews, the voice memo system I use instead of written notes, the team of people, starting with Marin, who handled the text-heavy work while I handled the operations. I didn't overcome dyslexia, Sterling. I built around it. The same way you route a truck around a road closure. You don't fix the road, you find a different way to the destination. He looked at the phone, at the apps, at the system I had built to navigate a world designed for people whose brains work differently than mine. Dad doesn't know any of this. Dad never asked. He should have. Yeah, he should have. My mother called me the week after the party. I didn't answer the first 2 times. The third time, I picked up. Hollis, Mom, I need to say something to you, and I need you to let me say it. Okay. I failed you, not just your father, me. I watched him dismiss you for 30 years and I said nothing. I let him call you the anchor and I didn't correct him. I introduced you as our other son because it was easier than explaining why you weren't where Sterling was, and the reason you weren't where Sterling was is because we never gave you the chance to be. We gave everything to Sterling and nothing to you, and I told myself it was because Sterling needed it more, but the truth is, it was because Sterling was easier. He fit the picture we wanted. You didn't, and instead of changing the picture, we tried to crop you out of it. I listened. Standing in my office at the ironclad warehouse, looking out the window at my fleet, listening to my mother say the words I had spent 34 years not needing and not asking for, and apparently still needing, because my eyes were wet and my chest was tight, and the voice on the phone was the voice of the woman who had carried me for 9 months and spent the next 34 years looking the other way. I hear you, Mom. Do you forgive me? I'm working on it. That's fair. It's going to take time. I have time. My father hasn't called. I'm not waiting for him to. Garrett Crane is a man who has spent 62 years being right, and admitting that he was wrong about his own son for 34 of those years is the kind of structural failure that a man like him doesn't recover from quickly. He'll come around, or he won't. Either way, I have a company to run. Cyrus Walden drove up from Tom's River last month. 78 years old, retired, tan, still wearing the same boots he wore on the loading docks in 1976. He walked through the Elizabeth warehouse, looked at the 140 trucks, the 3 buildings, the operation that his $40,000 check had made possible. You paid me back in 2019, he said, every dollar. I remember. I should have charged interest. You should have. He put his hand on my shoulder. Your father's wrong about you, Hollis. He's always been wrong about you, but you know that. You've known it since you were a kid loading trucks and seeing things the rest of us couldn't see. I know. So stop carrying his opinion around like it matters. It doesn't. It never did. I know that, too. Then act like it. Stand in the front row, kid. You've earned it. Nadia told me the same thing last night. We were on the couch in our apartment in Newark, the apartment I chose over a penthouse because penthouses are for people who need the view, and I need the proximity to the warehouse, which is the only view I've ever cared about. How are you feeling about the family stuff? She asked. Complicated. Good complicated or bad complicated? Both. Sterling wants to have a relationship. My mother wants to apologize. My father wants to pretend it didn't happen. And I want to go to work in the morning and move freight. So go to work in the morning and move freight, and let the complicated stuff sort itself out at its own pace. You sound like a logistics consultant. I sound like a woman who loves a man who built an empire from a loading dock and still wakes up at 4 a.m. because the trucks don't drive themselves. They will someday, autonomous vehicles. And when they do, you'll find something else to build. That's what you do, Hollis. You build things. She's right. That is what I do. It's 5 a.m. I'm standing on the loading dock at the Elizabeth warehouse. The same kind of dock where I started at 21, lifting boxes for $13 an hour, trying to figure out how things move from where they are to where they need to be. The sun isn't up yet, but the lights are on, and the first trucks are backing into the base and the dispatch board inside. It's lit up with routes and loads and deadlines, and the beautiful, complicated logic of making the world's freight arrive on time. 140 trucks, 3 warehouses, 200 clients, $38 million in revenue, built by a man who couldn't read until he was 14, built without a Harvard degree, built without a Tesla, built without a father who believed in him. My father called me the anchor, the thing that drags you down, the dead weight that keeps the family from going anywhere. But here's the thing about anchors that my father never understood, because he's a man who has always preferred sales. An anchor doesn't drag you down. An anchor holds you in place. An anchor is the thing that keeps you from drifting when the current is strong and the wind is wrong and the water is deep. An anchor is the heaviest, strongest, most essential piece of equipment on a ship, and without it, the ship goes wherever the ocean decides. Not where the captain chooses, where the ocean decides. I am the anchor. I have always been the anchor. And the company my father built, the $75 million operation he's handing to the sale, depends on the anchor to keep its freight moving, its supply chain running, its products arriving at the docks on time. The sale gets the glory, the anchor does the work, and the anchor doesn't need a Tesla to know what it's worth. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the one your family gave up on? The one they compared to a sibling and found wanting? The one they called the anchor, the slow one, the problem? And did you build something anyway? Did you take the label they stuck on you and turn it into fuel? Did you build your own world, on your own terms, without their money, without their approval, without their name on the door? Because if you did, you know what I know. That the back row is only where they put you. It's not where you have to stay, and the thing they called your weakness might be the thing that makes you unstoppable. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached the kid inside you who was told they weren't enough, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Especially the kid in the back row who's still sitting there, still counting, still waiting for someone to say their name. You don't need them to say it yourself, and then build something so loud they can't help but hear it. Comment your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. I'll see you in the next one.